Welcome to the Communicate on Purpose podcast. My name is Matt Curtis. I'm your host. You're listening to episode 9 of season 3. This week, I wanted to talk a little bit about the difference that happens in your emotional management when it comes to being a leader versus being an executor. In the communication space in particular, you're faced with a lot of deadlines, a lot of challenging deadlines often. In the context of the church in particular, I remember thinking just the volume of work that's being produced is crazy. Like there's just so many things that we're trying to communicate. And obviously there are solutions to that problem. You try to think about things like a communication strategy where you're limiting what's being communicated, and more than limiting, you're focusing and you're targeting a very specific end goal. But truthfully, there are plenty of organizations where you're not able to get leadership's buy-in into that philosophy. And so depending on the context that you're in, winning the day on a communication strategy might be very complicated. And so what you end up developing over time is just this high level of stress management tolerance, where you can tolerate tight deadlines because you know what it takes to get things done. You know how to basically accomplish it in somewhat, I don't want to say irrational circumstances, but like pretty crazy scenarios when it comes to what you're trying to get done in how short of a period of time. But when you transition to begin leading in a creative way, and in particular, I'm thinking about this separation between having no employees that report to you and then having employees that report to you. The emotion, the stress management maybe changes from that of a deadline stress to more of an emotion stress. And so I know for me, that was a really, really hard lesson to learn. And in some cases, it still is something that I work through regularly. I know how to put stuff on my shoulders and execute at a high level to get them done. I don't always know how I'm supposed to respond emotionally to a situation that happens that I'm leading. And so I want to talk a little bit about it because I think if you're in a creative space, you're going to end up encountering this. And even as I look back, I realized that some of the stress that I was carrying as a designer or as an executor really was more emotional stress. It was relational stress as opposed to just deadline stress. And so what you find is ministries that come in or clients that come in, they have a very high set of expectations, and the expectations almost shift into demands. And it's not always demands that you accomplish the objectives of the organization. It's a little bit more of you accomplish their objectives. And so there have been plenty of conversations for me that are really awkward because they're not actually mission-oriented or organizational value-oriented conversations. They are, I wanted X and you didn't provide X. Therefore, there's this emotional and relational tension and stress. And so I think it's important for us to remain calibrated on what exactly is important in the organization. In the next episode, we're going to talk a little bit about not allowing the organization's values to define your values. It's a little bit of a tricky one, and so I wanted to dedicate an episode to that. But really, what you want to make sure that you're doing is you're representing the values of the organization. And so the reason that that's important is that it gives you the opportunity to kind of step out of the emotional state and really just be a representative of the values of the organization. And so this doesn't become personal anymore. This becomes now a very almost logical conversation, but really it's just, hey, this is the stuff that's been requested of me. I missed the mark because I didn't do X, Y, and Z according to this ministry leader's desires, but we still were able to accomplish what the organization wants us to accomplish. And so I've had a lot of conversations like that. In the beginning, it was a lot of frustration, and I was almost like incubating bitterness towards these people that I disagreed with, people that I thought were being irrational, people that I thought were they were frustrating and selfish, all these terrible things. The reality, though, is that they're very driven by what they're doing, and I think there's also a little bit of a fear of if they're not successful enough, then there would be some sort of ramifications to that they would have to face. And so you begin having to step out of your own fears or insecurities or discomforts and begin thinking through the lens of the other people involved in the conversation. That's going to be really helpful for you as you as you navigate this stuff when it comes to how do you process it well and how do you still be kind in the midst of it. We talked a little bit about the spiritual role of the communications director. Like, this is it, man. This is that space where it lives. And so when you're able to keep in mind the organizational values that you're trying to accomplish, it allows you to shift the conversation. And so while my earlier conversations with my supervisors were much more of like, so-and-so wants this, and I think that's irrational. I remember one where I was having the conversation. I said, I was so amped up. I can't believe they want to do this. Like, what do they think we are? Like an art store? Like, come on, this is the most inefficient use of our time. The impact is so minimal, all these kinds of things. And I just sort of paused. My boss was very gracious to me and he kind of let me, let off steam a little bit. And I said, can you help me at all in this? Like, what in the world is the purpose of this? And he just sort of gently said, this is one of those projects where it may not seem efficient, but we find often that when families, it was in the context of dedicating kids, when families dedicate their kids, it's often a very important moment for them as a family. And we found that, if we can have a piece of paper or a photo or something on the wall that shows them or reminds them of the fact that they've made this commitment to raise their kids in a godly way, sometimes that's enough to kind of remind them that the road that they're walking, while difficult, is important and it's good, and remaining plugged into church is important. And I just felt this kind of wave of probably embarrassment, maybe shame. I just didn't see it that way. And by me having all of the conversations around my emotions, I ended up missing the mission of the organization even. Now, we ended up not even choosing to do that project. That's what's interesting, is that we didn't kind of choose to pursue it, but I kept finding that I was assuming that these people had these kind of petty or selfish projects in mind that they thought were neat, these pet projects, when really I was losing sight of what could be the mission. And so when it comes to this management of emotion, you really do need to think outside of just how do I get it done? And that's the temptation as an executor. How do I get it done? I look at my list. How do I get it done? Even this week, the week that I'm recording this, I had a lot of stuff on my to-do list and I was feeling overwhelmed. And so I had a conversation with my boss. My conversation actually wasn't about my to-do list at all. My conversation was about, hey, I want to make sure that I'm in alignment with the organization's values. Because what I found was that my emotions were starting to creep up a little bit. And I was starting to get frustrated, starting to get stressed, starting to get worried, starting to get whatever. And what I was doing is I was really focused on the project management stress. I was focused on the execution stress. But I began to realize that, I think this is actually not, I'm worried I won't get it done. This is actually, maybe I don't fit in the organization. Or maybe this project doesn't fit, or maybe I don't know how this project fits, or maybe I think that other people don't know how this project fits, or whatever it is. But it became a missions-focused conversation, and really then that becomes now a conversation about emotion. It's not a conversation about project management. And so as you are in the thick of whatever context you're in, you're going to be experiencing a lot of emotional challenges and project challenges. And often it's hard to discern which is which. But it's a really important skill to begin developing. One of the things that my wife helps me a lot with this in terms of working through these things. One of the things that I've been doing lately is when I'm feeling, for me, it's always like frustration. That's like the common thing that I feel is just frustrated. But it doesn't really, that's not enough. That's not enough of a description. And so when I start recognizing that I'm feeling frustrated, I just kind of pause. I'm like, okay, so I'm feeling frustrated right now. Why am I feeling frustrated? And I kind of play it out. So the other day I was having an issue with some technology. And I wasn't mad because I didn't think I'd be able to figure it out. I was mad at when it was happening. Like my headphones weren't working in the middle of a meeting that I was having or something like that. And I realized that it was actually a feeling of lack of control. I felt like I wasn't able to control the situation and I wasn't able to solve the problem when it needed to get solved. And so the meeting went fine. there wasn't really a disruption to it. Nobody complained on the other end of the Zoom calls or whatever. But I didn't realize that it was like a control thing in that moment. And there are other times where it's a values thing. Like, I think this is more important than other people think this is. Or sometimes it's a strategy problem. Like, I wouldn't approach it that way. I'd probably approach it this way. But until you get down to the root of what it is that you're struggling with, or what it is that you're actually kind of working through, it's hard to react appropriately. And so I would encourage you, as you're doing this, as you're doing your day to day, when you encounter a frustration, really dig in. Why? Why is this frustrating to you? What are the elements that are frustrating? And what that really allows you to do is it allows you to begin thinking through, okay, well then how do I respond right to this? How do I respond well to this? In the beginning of this, I kind of alluded to this idea of managing people versus managing tasks. And the reason I kind of identify that as a pivot point was, for me personally, it was because now when other people were stressed, I had to somehow help them navigate it. And that's great. I actually feel really comfortable in that position. I feel like that's one of the areas where I'm kind of good at it, is I can help people work through stressful situations. But where I struggled a lot was when people were making decisions that I thought were not good ones. And so I ended up really just stewing on the fact that someone made a bad decision, or someone didn't accomplish what they needed to. They missed a deadline, or they frustrated a client or a ministry. And that's really when it began becoming clear to me that, oh man, I don't know how to manage the emotions of leadership like I know how to manage the emotions of production. And so that, I think, is where, if you can start doing that before you have a team of people, because you're already experiencing those things. I know for me, as I look back, man, the design space was riddled with those problems, or those types of things. I just wasn't able to discern that they were different because I didn't have anybody else that they were clearly attached to. But now that I see what it looks like. And so it's a really helpful exercise to just slow down when you're feeling that tension and begin wrestling. What is it that I'm actually feeling here, so that I can respond appropriately? My hope really is that your perspective begins to shift away from everyone else being the enemy of what you value, and instead really digging into your own response to some of those things. And how do you adjust the way that you care for people and the way that you respond to those challenges, so that you can lead them well, and so that you can, frankly, lead yourself well, because the more aware you are of these things in your own life, the better you're going to perform, the better you're going to be in terms of an encouragement. Your countenance will be better, and people will see that difference. And so my hope is that that's helpful for you in the midst of whatever it is that you face today. If you found this episode helpful, I would encourage you to share it, pass it along with somebody else. It's better to have conversations around these things than to just sort of try to process them individually. And so, pass it around. Write a review if you haven't. That's helpful for people to discover the podcast as well. And so, I'm excited about the conversations that we're having, and even the conversations that are ahead of us. And so until next week, keep communicating on purpose.